So we've been talking a lot about Goku tapping into this new ability known as Ultra Instinct, otherwise known as the Mastery of Self movement. And we've been discussing how Goku got into this state of being and the hints that Dragon Ball Super has given us about what this actually is. So on this video, this is part 3 of my 3-part series analyzing Goku's Ultra Instinct. And in the previous videos, I discussed what I just mentioned, but we haven't really talked about sort of the influences and the real life principles behind Ultra Instinct, because guess what? There's actually a real life version, I guess you could say, of this. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be able to go out there and move past the speed of light, because that's impossible. But the idea of having your body instinctually move without using your brain, instinct versus memory, is very, very real, not just in psychology, but specifically in the martial arts. So we're talking about that here today, and I said the magic word, martial arts, and I almost never do martial arts related videos without my guest at this time. Please welcome back to Geekdom 101, Kendamu.
Hey, what's up?
All right, let's talk about martial arts and Dragon Ball. So, episode 110, brother. Goku almost died, but somehow pushed himself beyond his limits and tapped into a power that was almost a zombified state. This was something very different from anything we've seen before. And then we saw, of course, the shot where Toppo and Dispo attacked Goku, and his hands sort of had that reflectory effect, that reverb effect, that glow effect, very similar to Bruce Lee. And the minute that I saw it, and I remembered back to what Whis and Vados had talked about, specifically Whis in Resurrection F, about what mastery of self-movement is, allowing your body to move, I instantly thought about Bruce Lee. And I thought about that famous interview from years ago when he said, you know, you put water in a cup, it becomes a cup. You put it in a teacup, it becomes a teacup. You know, you become essentially, you know, like water. That's the Anderson Silva documentary. And it even goes into Hollywood. In Bruce Lee's film Enter the Dragon, they ask him, what's your style? And he says, my style? You can call it the art of fighting without fighting. And that's what an alpha line that is. Let's talk about Jeet Kune Do's principles versus what Goku did. So, Goku was able to defend and deflect and counterattack without thought. Can you explain this? Right off the hop.
So, with Jeet Kune Do, you could call it a style, and a lot of people do treat it that way. But at its
it's
core,
more of a philosophy, right?
At its core, it's a philosophy. Sort of like how like MMA isn't really like a style. It's sort of like this blend of things you get to work. And there's stuff that commonly works that people commonly use, but MMA itself isn't the style. It's more just like a way of doing combat, as opposed to like jiu-jitsu rules or karate rules or boxing rules or something, you know. Jeet Kune Do is sort of it's an older version of that philosophy that Bruce Lee came up with. And he really treated it as like the art of like true self-expression. And for that, you need to kind of tap into, you know, the very core of your being, and not, you know, and while the essence of it is good technique, you don't want to be so technical that you're a robot, but you don't want to be so wild that like you're just not doing anything. So you got to find this really nice, happy medium where, you know, you're the way he put it, I think in the same interview as like Be Like Water and whatnot, wasn't that, you know, he doesn't throw a punch, you know, it just, the punch happens all by itself. Like the punch is there. Like he is not there, just the punch.
Which is exactly what happened with Goku. Exactly. And it's exactly what Whis told him in Resurrection F. He says that the brain and like when you think, you know, the short amount of time it takes for your brain to, I guess, tell your arm or your leg to throw or to block could mean the difference between life and death. And I go back to a totally different quote from the movie Top Gun when Maverick says, you don't think. If you think, you're dead. Now, obviously, when you fight somebody, it's not that serious unless you're fighting a really tough guy. But it's kind of the same thing where you have to think. There are thoughts going through your brain, but you almost... it sort of becomes this, like, you just let it go and, like, your body reacts on its own. And the thing about mastery of self-movement or in this case Jeet Kune Do, or whatever you want to call it. Also, Mushin too is the same principles as Jeet Kune Do, and we're talking about the real life Mushin, the Japanese Mushin, not the anime version, the fictional one. Because in anime we have ki, which is throwing fireballs at each other, for lack of a better term, but in real life we also have ki. Same thing. They take a factual concept and make it into a fantasy, overblown thing. But Mushin's the same thing. And I just wanted to kind of talk to you about that, when it comes to Jeet Kune Do. From my understanding, this mastery of self movement is not necessarily just something that you can do in martial arts. It's a principle that the human body can do, because athletes can do it. You always wonder, like, how can Larry Bird pass a ball so fast? How can LeBron James and Kevin Durant just know so quickly where to be and how to shoot and land at least most of their shots? And I think a lot of it is through repetition. I think, and you're going to have to fill me in on this one, bro. I think that I read somewhere that when you first start taking karate or taekwondo, you throw a punch and you learn how to block. You're not going to learn how to block properly the first 2 weeks. It's going to take actually a very long time, months, maybe even years, to develop the reflexes. I think somebody said repetition for the human brain or for the human psyche, for the central nervous system, is I think it's 125 times or maybe 125,000. I forget the number, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Can you elaborate on the repetition thing?
I don't know the exact number, but really when it comes to any martial art that I've studied, I started out in Taekwondo. I moved into Jeet Kune Do concepts and kind of dabbled in a couple other things while I was doing Jeet Kune Do concepts. And then I moved most recently and for the longest time into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And in any of those, the big thing that gets harped on the most is repetition. Like when I'm in jiu-jitsu class and they say, okay, do this technique, 5 times back and forth. If I get done with 5 times back and forth and I'm sitting there waiting for everyone else to get done, I'm going to get looked at and I'm going to be told, you can probably get a few more reps in, go ahead and do that. So repetition is a big part of it, because when you first start doing it, you've got to think about every little facet, even if it's something as simple as just a little punch. You need to learn how to jab, you have to know how to turn your body with it. You have to know how to time all of that together in order to give the biggest amount of power. If you're doing something in jiu-jitsu, like you're setting up an arm bar, you have to think about every little aspect of it. But the more and more you do it, the less and less you have to think about it, and the more natural it becomes. And then on top of that, actually practicing it under pressure starts to get you to be able to just kind of react with it, and not really in a way that that's mechanical. You try and bait someone to react in a way to get you to do some counterfighting, but in the ideal sense, you react when necessary without thinking about it, just like you were talking about a minute ago.
No, and it's interesting because, like I said, it doesn't just apply to martial arts. I mean, a lot of artists in our community, shout out to all of them. Olympia, Sean, Thomas Love. We have a lot of great artists that do work. When they first start out, they're drawing a character, and they're thinking, and they're kind of over going over what they're doing, just kind of focusing on it. But then a few years go by, and you've got people now like Olympia, who I mentioned, who can draw characters without even thinking. I'm not saying she doesn't think, but she can just draw the basic layout quick. I seen her do it on streams, just quick, and it just goes back to people look at that and they say, wow, you're really talented, and you are, but a lot of it is practice. And that's the thing that I tell people, man, we all have God-given talents, but to sharpen those talents, you have to practice. So I want to ask you about this whole thing. We know that it's been proven through science that mastery of self-movement, or this kind of Jeet Kune Do principle, it's in a different part of the brain than memory. It's a totally different part of the brain. It's instinct. It's like when you wake up, you have to go take a leak, or when you wake up and when you're underwater and you don't know how to swim, you instinctually splash around, or if somebody is attacking you and you have no martial arts training, you're going to instinctually try to get away from your attacker. It's how animals survive, not just humans. We're talking about animals in the jungle, in the ocean. This is how we are wired through Mother Nature. So the question is like, this is more of training your central nervous system versus your brain, or is it still like just a different part of your brain?
It's something that, now that specific aspect of it, I haven't looked into as much, but it's something like a lot of people, what they call it in, say, martial arts or athletics or whatever, is muscle memory. And it's not like your muscles actually have memory, but that's usually what it's referred to when you practice something so much athletically or whatever, any sort of physical thing, that it becomes just sort of second nature to you. Where that's stored in the brain, where the neural connections are made, is not something that I've specifically studied, but that's generally what's referred to as just muscle memory. And it can be found even in like simple stuff, like anybody who is watching this video right now, anybody who's listening, who, has rode a bike or driven or walked somewhere the same path every day, day in and day out for a long time, and then they start to notice one day, oh wow, I've already gotten to work or school or wherever, and I didn't even think about what I was doing. Like I just kind of went there on autopilot. It's sort of the same thing when it comes to martial arts or athletics or whatever. You see certain things taking place and your body just kind of starts to automatically react in the correct ways.
And it's interesting because when it comes to not just Dragon Ball, but also Bruce Lee's principles, you see principles of Wing Chun and Krav Maga as well, especially when it comes to Whis and Beerus. That's really, we're going to focus on that in a separate video in the future. But, some of the principles of Jeet Kune Do talk about, efficiency, how you want to essentially use as much force as possible in the least amount of time, which is all about what Goku and Jiren are doing. These guys are not playing around. They're fast and they're, quick and they're on point. And we see it with Beerus. I mean, we saw what Beerus did to Piccolo with chopsticks, in Battle of Gods, the movie. And it kind of, if you like movies, you've seen Steven Seagal movies, he uses his version of Aikido, and it's very effective and quick. It's not just about blocking a punch. It's about blocking and counterattacking with the same motion. In other words, you're doing both at once. And there's that one scene in episode 110 where Goku lunges at Jiren, and you see that really fast animation that Naoki Tate animated where you kind of see Jiren standing still, but you see his hands like flashing around and moving. That is freaking Jeet Kune Do Krav Maga, bro. That's like the effect. He's blocking and counterattacking at the same time. And I just love the fact that not only did Toriyama choose to incorporate this in the series, but the animators knew what was going on and took it and did it really effectively while still keeping it very entertaining for us at home.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things. Like, you talk about efficiency, and part of that is, Bruce Lee, and with the idea of Jeet Kune Do, like the idea is the art of expressing the human body. And you want to be able to do that as honestly and as efficiently as possible. You want to really get your message out there, what your body is trying to express. And then on top of that, you talk about blocking and countering at the same time. That's another thing that was, I've seen it like in a lot of other places nowadays. Martial arts have really evolved since the 90s, thanks to, mixed martial arts becoming more of a mainstream thing. But Bruce Lee definitely had this whole idea of, he didn't like how what he was looking at back in the day was, you block and then you take your turn and hit and then you block and whatever. Like, the idea was,
it's just not fast enough. It's just not fast.
The idea
in a
is,
real fight.
Yeah, you have to parry and counter at the same time. Like, they're going to have an opening when they're trying to hit you. Why not exploit that? And the best way to do that is not to give them a turn, but to break their rhythm, to use broken rhythm to get through and bam.
And I feel like with Taekwondo, for example, that's a gateway drug for martial arts. A lot of kids take Taekwondo as a kid, and that's a good starting point, but that's not the final point because a lot of Taekwondo is focused on forms. Like, you have to learn all these different forms, but in a real fight, a street fight, you got to watch your back for the guy's friends. You got to make sure he doesn't have a beer bottle. He might pull a knife on you. See, it's totally different. I love watching Olympic Taekwondo. I love it because it's brutal and it's fun to watch. But that's not how a real fight works. In a real fight, you have to be faster and you have to take the dude out as quickly as possible because if you don't, you're going to get hurt. Especially now when people are taking classes on this all the time. One dude ends up drunk. He might be a little drunk, but he still knows how to fight, and you just have to be more effective. And I like how the series is evolving with that. Even though this is a principle, like you said, that Bruce Lee came up with ages ago, Dana White always calls him the father of mixed martial arts, and I kind of somewhat agree, because Bruce Lee was the first guy to say, okay, all these styles, they're cool, we can take bits and pieces from them, but you got to kind of learn a little bit of everything. You got to learn how to choke a guy out, or at least take a guy out, or at least be able to protect yourself for any kind of situation.
And you also, not only that, but you have to learn to kind of how to do it in a way that's truly you. Because if I hop in a ring with somebody and I start sparring and I start imitating Bruce Lee, I mean, that
you're not Bruce Lee, bro.
If I start trying to imitate the movements, I start doing the way he kind of like walks around and stuff like that, start holding my hands the way he does and making the same faces and stuff. Like I become more concentrated on acting like somebody else than I do on actually getting the job done. And so you have to make sure that what you're doing not only is efficient and effective and stuff like that, but is actually you. And so that's one of the things I liked about when I was studying Jeet Kune Do concepts was that it kind of gave me like a starter set of things that I knew that really worked. So if I'm studying with somebody else, or if I end up going to another school eventually or something like that, which I did, I would know what to look for. And I could sort of take this starter set and kind of take things out and put things in and tweak things and whatnot. And it's still Jeet Kune Do even today, but it's my Jeet Kune Do.
Yeah, everybody's Jeet Kune Do is different.
Exactly.
And if you want to learn more about this, check out the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. It's available in any library. It's like one of the most highest sold books ever, I would say, in history. Check that out. And also, there's tons of documentaries on this. And check out Kendamu's channel. I will leave a link down below, as well as Battle Geek Plus, which is where Kendamu spends his time talking about video games. And hey, I'll tell you what, you better get those fingers reflexes ready for fighters coming up next year, because it's the same thing, bro, like water. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. You can get these reflexes in sports. You can get these reflexes in art. You can, learn to think fast while doing math. You can do it in fighting, or you can do it while playing against me in Dragon Ball FighterZ next year.
Yeah, and that's going to be... There's some big stuff coming down the line for Kendamu next year when it comes to fighters. So, thank you for being here, dude.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Always. Thank you. And check out Kendamu's channel. Leave your thoughts down below, and we'll talk to y'all later.